The house on Willow Lane was the kind of place people dreamed of living in. Its ivy-covered brick walls and sprawling garden, bursting with roses, hydrangeas, and lavender, seemed to whisper promises of a perfect life. Clara and Daniel had moved in just 3 months ago, their wedding photos still fresh on the mantelpiece. Clara, at 24, was radiant and full of life, her laughter echoing through the halls. Daniel, a few years older, was steady and kind, the kind of man who always seemed to know what to do. To the neighbors, they were the perfect couple. But perfection, as Clara was beginning to realize, was a fragile thing. It could shatter with the slightest touch. It started innocently enough. Clara had always been an early riser, and she loved to spend her mornings in the garden, tending to the flowers or simply sipping coffee on the patio. The house next door belonged to the Millers, a quiet family with a teenage son named Ethan. At 17, Ethan was tall and lanky, with a mop of dark hair and a shy smile. He often worked in his family's garden, and Clara would wave to him over the low stone wall that separated their properties. One morning, Ethan called out to her, "Your roses are amazing. How do you get them to bloom like that?" Clara smiled, flattered. "It's all about the soil. And a little bit of love." They began talking more after that. Ethan was curious and eager to learn, and Clara enjoyed his company. He reminded her of herself at that age, full of dreams and questions, but unsure of how to chase them. Daniel was often busy with work, leaving Clara to fill her days alone. Ethan became a welcome distraction. But as the weeks passed, their conversations grew longer and more intimate. Ethan confessed that he felt out of place at school, that he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. Clara, in turn, found herself opening up about her own doubts. She loved Daniel, but marriage wasn't what she had expected. It felt like a role she was playing rather than a life she was living. She missed the freedom of her single days, the thrill of spontaneity. Ethan listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Ethan climbed over the garden wall. Clara was pruning the roses, her hands stained with soil. He stood there, awkward and unsure, before blurting out, "I think about you all the time." Clara froze. She knew she should tell him to leave, to go back to his side of the wall. But she didn't. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a boy, but someone who made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. It started with a kiss. Just one, quick and furtive, as if they could pretend it never happened. But it did happen, and it changed everything. After that, they began meeting in secret. Clara would wait until Daniel left for work, and Ethan would slip through the garden gate. They knew it was wrong, but the thrill of it was intoxicating. For Clara, it was an escape from the monotony of her life. For Ethan, it was a fantasy come to life. The secrecy only heightened the tension. Every creak of the floorboards, every ring of the doorbell, sent Clara's heart racing. She became paranoid, constantly glancing over her shoulder, convinced that someone would find out. Ethan, too, grew more reckless. He started texting her late at night, his messages growing bolder with each passing day. "I can't stop thinking about you," he wrote one evening. "What are we doing?" Clara didn't reply. She couldn't. But the question lingered in her mind, gnawing at her conscience. What were they doing? She was a married woman, and he was just a boy. But every time she tried to end it, Ethan would show up at the garden wall, his eyes pleading, and she would give in. One evening, Daniel came home early. Clara was in the garden, her hair disheveled and her cheeks flushed. Ethan had just left, but the air still felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel stood in the doorway, his briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable. "Who are you talking to?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with suspicion. Clara's heart skipped a beat. "No one," she said too quickly. "Just the neighbor's cat." Daniel didn't say a word. He just turned and walked back into the house, leaving Clara standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a cold dread settle over her, the kind that comes when you know you've made a mistake you can't undo. The days that followed were tense and silent. Daniel moved into the guest room, and Clara felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She tried to apologize, to explain, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Daniel didn't want explanations. He wanted to know why she had risked everything for a boy who was barely more than a stranger. Clara didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, but it was one she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. She had been searching for something: excitement, passion, a sense of herself that she had lost along the way. But in chasing it, she had destroyed the life she had built. Ethan, meanwhile, was struggling with his own guilt. He had idolized Clara, but now he saw the pain he had helped cause. He stopped coming to the garden, and Clara felt his absence like a physical ache. She wondered if he regretted it, if he hated her, or if he simply didn't care. One night, as Clara lay awake in bed, she heard a faint tapping at the window. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The tapping came again, louder this time. She crept to the window and pulled back the curtain, her heart pounding. Ethan stood outside, his face pale in the moonlight. "I need to talk to you," he whispered. Clara hesitated. She knew she shouldn't let him in, but the look in his eyes was desperate. She opened the window, and he climbed inside, his hands trembling. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "I feel like I'm losing my mind." Clara reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away. "Ethan, I'm sorry," she said. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," he said. "And now I don't know how to fix it." The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of Daniel's voice downstairs. He was talking to someone, his tone sharp and clipped. She crept to the top of the stairs and listened, her stomach churning. "I know what's been going on," Daniel said. "And I want it to stop." Clara's blood ran cold. She peered over the banister and saw Ethan standing in the hallway, his face pale and drawn. Daniel stood in front of him, his arms crossed, his expression hard. "Stay away from my wife," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. "Or you'll regret it." Ethan nodded, his eyes wide with fear, and fled out the front door. Clara watched him go, her heart breaking. She knew it was over, but the guilt and shame would linger long after. In the end, it was Daniel who made the decision. He asked for a divorce, his voice steady, but his eyes filled with sorrow. Clara didn't fight him. She packed her bags and left the house on Willow Lane, the garden she had loved, now a reminder of everything she had lost. As she drove away, she thought about Ethan. She wondered if he would remember her, or if she would become just a story he told himself when he was older. She hoped he would find what he was looking for, even if she never had. The house on Willow Lane still stands, its garden as beautiful as ever. But for Clara, it will always be a place of what-ifs and regrets, a reminder that some walls are meant to be left unbroken.